we scheduled this 2 years ago. Obviously, some stuff got in the way.
Yeah.
So primarily the people who listen to these tend to be creative. So you wouldn't describe yourself as creative?
Well,
possibly in the kitchen, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not an advertising creative.
Yeah.
But I do think that what I do has some creativity in it.
Yeah, exactly, that's why. So how would you describe what you do if you're introducing yourself to these
good question.
unruly bunch who listen to this thing?
Well, I suppose what I do is I try to make sense of the world and how it relates to advertising, how advertising draws on culture. I look at the way that the brain pays attention to the world, and I look at the way that, kind of psychology, art, advertising all kind of come together at any given time, and we try to understand what works and what doesn't. And what I've been doing is looking at changes in style of advertising, how they have changed, I think, in the last 15 years or so, towards a style that's less effective.
So you've done that in 2 collaborations with the IPA so far?
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want to?
Yeah, well, actually, I've been running the creative effectiveness research for the IPA for the last 5 years or so, and I've written 2 books that draw
people
on that
know.
work.
Some people would know them.
Lemon is the first, published 2019, and I just launched another one last year, 2021, called Look Out.
So before we get into those, one thing that occurs to me is when you describe what you do, I would have thought advertising would have a lot more people doing that, but they don't seem to have that many, really. Because obviously it's absolutely vital.
Yeah.
If you're in the business of trying to communicate with people out there, people assessing that and evaluating that and figuring out what works. You think that would be a handy thing for an ad agency?
You would think so, wouldn't you? David Ogilvy, he was a researcher like me, and he did it, and he looked at what worked and what didn't. And then he set up Ogilvy and Mather. He started as a research director. Yeah, he started as a research director.
Why have agencies not got more research people, or why is that trend not developed?
Well, good question. More? I mean, every you go to pretty much any advertising conference, and the focus seems to me on measurement, on media, and very little on the creative itself. Why is that?
Well, I think there was a really good quote by Rory Sutherland. I have to try and remember how he phrased it, but it was something like advertising agencies avoid methodology or anything. There's a sort of feeling of it. There's no rules. You just start from scratch every time.
Yeah.
So consequently, it's never taken that seriously, really.
No,
because it's why would you not adopt a methodology?
That's right. I'd hate anyone to think that the work I'm doing is sort of leading to a painting by numbers kind of approach. It's not meant to be that. But there are some basic principles, I think that people should know about, and it's
100%. But even the way you say, I would hate people to think that, the assumption is people might think that almost defensively.
Well, someone has said that at one point, and I well, that's certainly not my intention.
That's a sort of weird fear of learning, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
We can't handle some information. We can't handle the truth. We'd rather just work in a bubble and see what pops out.
Yeah. Because
you would just be relaying information and facts.
Yeah, I mean, look,
it's nothing scary. You're not saying, only run things.
Well, I hope what I do is kind of make the case for the kind of advertising that we might all want to make, actually.
Yeah.
That is entertaining, that engages, that is fun to make and to be around, and because that's the sort of advertising that works extremely well.
Well, also the funny thing is, if you speak to most creatives, they'll say they prefer restrictive briefs than open briefs. So occasionally, I would get an account person or planner say, great news. Volkswagen have said, we're not sure what to say about this, so you've got a completely open brief. Which they think you want, because then you can do anything you want and enjoy, do something fun. But of course, it's a nightmare. You don't know where to start or what to say. It's just you can't focus. Whereas most of the most creative work has come from a real problem that you have to overcome. A good example being the cigarette advertising of the late 70s, 80s, was a tremendous problem to solve. But it led to very creative solutions. So having, giving people some guidance and restrictions in some ways would generally be a good thing.
I would like to think it's unlocking something rather than preventing something.
Focusing. It's helping you focus.
Yeah.
So there's one thing I was going to ask you about, which is the quote on your last book, which was about the cone and the dog.
Oh, yes.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
So I think you're, from memory, you said that at the moment it's like the business has got a cone around its head like a dog and is too myopic, would you say? Not taking in a wider...
Yeah, that's right. I mean, not just the industry, but the world.
Yeah.
I mean, the story that goes with it is that, when I was writing the last book, Look Out, I went out for a walk and... a woman was walking the other way with her dog, and the dog just jumped up at me and started barking at me. And she said, "I'm so sorry about that. He's not normally like that. It's the cone." And the dog was wearing one of those veterinary cones on its head, And sure enough, you look into it. Dogs can become very aggressive and fearful when they've got the cone on their head because it narrows their attention.
Well, so they get
anxious. Anxious. Yeah, I mean, you would, wouldn't you?
I'd probably do the same.
Well, I think we all would.
Yeah.
And that is kind of, and I've just been thinking about different types of attention that the brain brings to bear on the world. Kind of broad beam attention, that looking around us, the world presented to us, and this very narrow focus type of attention that we bring to bear on things. And it just struck me that is what's happened to us too in the last 5-10 years. We're looking at our mobile devices, 3 hours on average a day.
Is that what it is?
That is what it is. Yeah, on average. Our attention has become very narrow and very close up.
Yeah.
And you can actually see that in the advertising around us today. You look at a lot of advertising, it's really close up, really close up pack shots, close-up details of the product, the beer being poured in the glass, the egg being sliced, just the hands, just the mouth. Our attention has narrowed, and you can actually see it in the work. And I look at the work of the neuroscientist, a brilliant thinker, philosopher, Ian McGilchrist, to try and explain this. And he talks about the different types of attention and how they're related to the two halves of the brain, the two hemispheres of the brain. And he describes, he says that there are 5 types of attention. 4 of them are associated with the right hemisphere, which presents the world to us in the first place. So it alerts us to what's going on. It keeps us vigilant to stuff that's out there on the edge of our awareness. It's responsible for sustained attention, divided attention. It's really important for presenting the world to us. And anything of interest, it passes to the left brain or left hemisphere to sort of look at in more detail, more closely, more close up, narrow focus, narrow beam. And the thing is, this broad beam attention always comes first. And we always see the wood before we see the trees. But in our world today, in the last 5-10 years, I think we've become extremely narrow in the way that we look at things. And with that come many of the habits of thinking of the left hemisphere. And you can actually see them, as I've shown, in the advertising around us. So by that I mean the left. I should perhaps describe some of the features of the left and right brain, I can sort of talk about the creative. Yeah. So the right brain is broad and vigilant in its attention. It sees everything in context. It presents the world to us. It understands people. So it understands their intonation, their gestures, their accents, the kind of delivery, if you like, the way things are said. So the implicit, if you like. And it also understands, it has an appreciation that, two opposing thoughts could both be true at the same time, which means it can do humour. It understands humour and metaphor. And it's what gives us our sense of lived time, space, and helps us to appreciate music, So it's also the hemisphere which is better connected to the limbic system, which is what helps us to experience emotion. And it means that, and it also is more associated with episodic memory. So that's memory of people, events, places, in our lives. Whereas the left hemisphere is very narrow in its attention. It likes to break things down into smaller parts, sort of reductionist, if you like, categorize things and people. It's very explicit. It can't deal with nuance. Things are either this or that.
Right.
Very linear in the way that it thinks. It's a bit like an engineer, or a bureaucrat. And it can't really understand things on two levels. It likes tools with which to manipulate the world. Language, signs and symbols are things of the left hemisphere. It's also overly optimistic. It gets quite angry. It's impetuous. And it thinks it knows best, basically. You see this in split brain patients, and the left hemisphere thinks it knows best, when often it doesn't really know what it's doing. There's so many things the right hemisphere can do that the left hemisphere can't. And it's sort of reliant. It can understand rhythm, but only really rhythm of music.
Right.
So, and also, I should say, it's associated with semantic memory. So that's memory of facts and figures in the public domain. So there are some clues there already. Is if we were becoming more left-brained as a community, as a society, you would expect to be able to see some of those features in culture around and in advertising. And that's what I set out to test and found, is that when you look back at advertising over the last 30 years or so, in the last 15, since about 2006, you see this quite dramatic swing towards advertising that has no sense of lived time. So it's played out in short, sharp cuts. So lots of individual kind of almost stop motion or freeze frame effects. It has no discernible place. So we don't really know where these ads are set, because we're often so close up to things. There's been a kind of flattening as well. So you don't get the same sense of depth. You get words on the screen telling us what to think or do. We have people staring at the camera, rather than dialogue and what I call betweenness. People talking to each other,
So do you think that's increased? Is it people breaking the third wall, fourth wall?
Yes.
Which wall is it?
Fourth, I think.
Fourth. And looking at you rather than you looking at
very direct.
What they're doing.
Very direct, very linear, very transactional.
So why would that be then? I can imagine some of the things that you've mentioned obviously are linked to the web, the internet becoming a bigger and bigger part of our lives, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But things like people staring at the camera rather than you look, because the classic ad would have been pre that, perhaps. You may be seeing a couple enjoying themselves somewhere and think, I'd like to do that. Whereas now they're looking at you with a drink.
Exactly.
Smiling.
It used to invite you in.
Yeah.
And that stare pushes you away, that facial frontality. And often it's very symmetrical. So there's a lot of symmetry today. Often that person at the centre of the frame.
Yeah.
And, you get symmetry as a thing of the left hemisphere as well, like symmetry. And stasis, it likes things to be fixed. And there's a sort of rigidity that goes with the left hemisphere. It's not very good with flow. It likes sort of fixity. And so you get this... stare is associated with certain kinds of mental illness that go with left hemisphere dominance. Schizophrenia, for instance. Right. So the stare is it's a rigidity, it's a fixity. It's both kind of aggressive, confrontational, adversarial, but it's also a sign of terrified helplessness at the same time. And when you look at, as I do in the latest book, levels of anxiety over the last 10 years in society and how humour has disappeared, it's quite clear to me that rigidity has crept into culture in a way that you can actually see it in the face.
So you don't see this as an advertising issue rather than a society issue?
It's society, and advertising is drawing on that and reflecting it, and maybe exacerbating it. Who knows? But it's a general thing. If you look at the art of, because I look in the last book at two periods in history, in particular, one being the Reformation, when following the printing press, the invention of the printing press, which you have to look back that far really to understand what the internet is doing for us. It's a disruption of the public sphere, a technological disruption. And we had very many similar issues in 1500 to those in 2020. Kind of fake news, no one really knew what to trust. Lots of things being printed, and no one really knew, what was true, what was false. You look at the art of the period, and you get sort of symmetry. You get this words on the canvas, like we've got words on advertising today. And darkened skies, this was a bleak period. And if you go into
how long did that last for?
Well, 180 years, Things move a bit more quickly today. But if you go to the National Gallery, go to room 12, I was in there the other day, you just look around, and it's portrait after portrait of people staring at you in fixity. There's no movement at all. And we're going through exactly the same thing. And you look at actually the self-portraits of, the avant-garde, also following massive technological changes, the motor car, the aeroplane, film, photography, all those things. Very disorientating period in history. Just like today, I would argue. You've got the self-portraits all have this kind of stare. Look at Malevich's stare. Look at, Werfkin's, Anne van Werfkin's work. They've all got this disconcerting sort of stare. And I think you get it when there is a period of detachment, that you tend to see a loss of vitality, by which I mean human movement and connection. And you see this adversarial stance start to take hold in culture, which I think we're going through at the moment. I think it's a kind of warning, really, when you see the stare emerging. And it's what I was trying to say, actually, in the book, look out.
And how has that been received by particularly marketing people?
Yeah, they're fascinated.
Do they accept that? Are they pleased to be alerted to that, or do they reject it?
Well,
obviously everyone's different.
It was a very difficult thing to talk about, but I think when you show the evidence, because by the way, I look at how these features are associated with attention to advertising and emotional response, and the stare, this facial frontality, which is so common today. It's quite clear it pushes people away.
So it's dropping off a cliff, isn't it, in terms of attention?
Yeah, yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about potentially how we change that.
Yeah,
and
hope so.
We've rather than just give people the gloomy
yes,
that this is it for the next 180 years.
No.
And we're going to do this through the lens of a stage show. That the idea is it the Howard Gossage quote?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So do you want to deliver that quote? You probably could.
God, what is it by heart?
I've got it here.
Have you got it there?
Yeah. So Howard Gossage's quote: "The buying of time or space is not taking out a hunting license on someone else's private preserve." It's reserve, isn't it? Rather than preserve.
Yeah.
It's a jam.
Yeah. concert.
But is the renting of a stage on which we may perform. I'm going to read that again so I can cut that out. So the buying of time or space is not the taking out of a hunting licence on someone else's private reserve, but is the renting of a stage on which we may perform. So I really like that quote because I guess one of the reasons that I got into advertising in 85 is it seemed like a nice thing to talk to lots of people through. So you would be given space on TV or billboards, and you could almost be like an interpreter for people. Clients would say, we need to tell everybody this. And you think, well, what would be a great way to tell them that in a way that would engage them, maybe make them laugh, help them remember it. And that was kind of it, really, in a nutshell. Yeah. And that seemed like a great thing to do. So the idea of using the stage to engage people seems like a great way to look at it. And I think that often, particularly now, there's a sort of feeling of we can get to people anyway via their phones and their computers. So we don't have to be, sweat too much about charming them or do it, because we can just cut straight to them. But of course, they're ignoring all their messages because they don't need to engage them. Yeah. So it's a sort of weird.
Well, I think the ability to target has changed the type of work that's made. Yeah. Because
people don't bother now.
There's no. I talk about if you're going to capture the attention and elicit that kind of emotional response in people, which is really the kind you might describe it as brand building advertising, but that what you need. I think I often show the Heineken. Wordsworth, I wandered about a bit on my own, that's an ad that doesn't assume an interest in the brand or product. Instead, it tries to create interest in the brand or the product. You look at a lot of advertising for beer today, and there's a lot of this sort of close-up stuff and just really product-centric stuff. Yeah. It assumes already that there is some kind of interest in the brand or product, and it just seeks you to nudge you, towards a purchase, what you might call performance advertising. But you can't lose sight of this brand building advertising you need for that kind of performance stuff to work.
But I suppose I find it hard to believe that anybody could think that just presenting the products really big, it's going to do anything, because even if you just use your own experience, you'll know the numbers better than me, but I often quote them, and wherever I got my source from, I think it was 2,500 ads people are exposed to a day in various forms. You can correct me on that.
No, you're probably right.
So I think it's that. So at various presentations I've done, put that out in dots and then made one red. And then when you look at it in that way, you should think that is ridiculous that you're ever anyone's going to notice your little red dot, because 2,500 is a lot of dots. If you look at it like that, and that's what's happening every day, the thought that you can just go, well, if we present our product really big on its own and perhaps say it's really good next to it, people will think, oh, I'll give it a go, is insane.
Well, that is what's happened, isn't it?
That seems to be what's happening. Yeah. I mean, I did a campaign a couple of years ago for Lucky Saint Beer, and we thought, well, what can we do? How do we give them some sort of property that separates them from the competition and makes it feel special? And we did these various things with halos, like a little gas halo above the bottle that had just been opening and various things. And they did that. They were good. And then a couple of weeks ago, I saw some posters up, and it was just the bottle as big as you could make it with Lucky Saint on it. And you think, why would they? I don't understand why they would do that. I guess I was not thinking, not in an angry, but just thinking, why would you do that? Are they just thinking, is that because they can say to Sainsbury's, you may have seen our name up? It's really big. So then people at Sainsbury's say, oh yeah, Lucky's, I've seen that on posters. I don't know whether it's a trade thing but obviously seeing that really big, I just can't understand how that would help.
Well, no, I mean, it might help. I mean, one of the things that's talked about a lot these days is, distinctive assets and how your logo or font or colour or shape, these things are important. Of course they are. But it seems to me that when it comes to advertising, particularly audio-visual advertising, they're static, they're stationary, they don't do anything, And so the trick for me, I think, and I haven't talked about this yet, but what I found is that it's the living that interests people, that draws people in. The living in a place, a definable place where something happens, an incident happens, and something out of the ordinary, slightly out of the ordinary, relatable but out of the ordinary. That's the kind of work that has been disappearing, and that's the kind of work that attracts people and gets them to watch, And so I think that if you're going to try and create an asset, it ought to be living, or at least think about it being living. So a character, a repeatable character. They've gone, and I've shown this.
Why have characters gone? Because obviously all the most famous when they do those top 100 ads things on Channel 4, I don't know if they still do them. I'd say half of them seem to have characters who, most of them are from John Webster, to be honest. But they're like Arkwright, Honey Monster, Smash Mouth. They're familiar characters who turn up on a regular basis, who are associated with the brand, and they kind of generally make you laugh.
Yeah.
Whereas if you paid me £1,000 for everyone I could remember that's on TV at the moment, I wouldn't be.
Well, that's right.
Money off you. I can't think of any off the top
I was saying, that the right brain, which is interested in people, is also what helps us to remember people, places, episodes in our life. When we see an episode play out, the Hofmeister Bear, we remember it. And so characters, or I call them fluent devices, these things that recur again and again, could also be scenarios where you kind of understand the conceit, like, you're not you when you're hungry for Snickers. That it's played out in new and interesting ways, but the basic conceit is fixed, and that's
a good example.
Yeah, that's how you do it,
But why is that? You obviously probably don't know the answer to this, but why is that not done more often? And that is a great example, and I think that campaign's still running.
Yeah, and people tripping over it to work on it, I think.
So why are people not thinking, that seems to work, and it's fun, and people like it, and it's doing well for them? Let's do something like that.
Well, unfortunately, the left brain is no good with narrative. It's no good with characters. And, I think that there is this sort of... there are new habits of thinking around in this digital, transactional, literal world that make it very difficult to get that kind of work made, or to make that kind of work.
To write it, sell it, buy it,
all of that.
All of those.
We've... where did the jingle go?
Yeah,
music has disappeared. Instead, you've got these highly rhythmic soundtracks replacing, again, that kind of rigidity and fixity.
Well, that's true. The other 50% on that top 100 would be jingles and soundtracks.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I feel like going through that list and figuring out what's characters and what's jingles and soundtracks, because that would absolutely be at least 3/4. It's interesting. I did this little, I think it was after I read, what had I just read? Why the Peddler Sings.
Oh, yes,
which is
brilliant
great.
book.
It's brilliant. And I'm doing a podcast with him soon. And there was something in it that made me think, because he was very honest, made me think, Paul Feldwick, I should say. What did I actually like when I was growing up? Because once you get into advertising, there's a lot of stuff that you have to like. You have to like all the Volkswagen work, whether it's good or bad. There's certain things you have to adopt. If that's good, this is good. There's a canon. You have to take on board the canon, and you also have to reject stuff because that's considered bad. I was trying to figure out what I actually did like growing up before I knew anything about advertising. And that made me ask a series of people to just write down, I think I called it, what I liked before I knew what I was supposed to like.
Yeah.
So, what was quite interesting to me is I asked a whole bunch of cool people, and they picked ads that they wouldn't have picked if it was called my favourite ads.
Or most creative ads or something.
Yeah, or most creative ads. So they were jingles
Yeah.
and they were characters or just ads with good songs.
Yeah.
And they'd say, I used to really like this. I
Trio.
really liked the song. Trio.
Yeah.
That was it. There was tons of Martini. Lots of people have picked Martini ads.
Yeah.
And I've never heard anyone in the business, in a creative department, say, do you remember those Martini ads? They were great.
Yeah.
Whereas when you ask it through that lens, they go, I love the Martini ad. It was just such a good song and it was just nice to watch. And they would write that. And so I found that really interesting, that the people creating them, me included, isn't kind of connecting what affects us and what we put out.
Well, that's right. And that's why the show is a great metaphor, a stage and a show. Because as Paul rightly says, in my view, advertising is mostly about entertainment. It's about... if you're going to invite someone you invite yourself into the living room, that old quote.
At least,
the least you can do to be polite and interesting.
Yeah. But that, I don't think that would go down very well with a lot of clients today. If you say it's entertainment, essentially, it sounds so
sounds frivolous to the left brain, doesn't it? And self-indulgent,
Yeah.
but. Actually, that's people don't want to be bored, and Ogle, he said you can't bore someone into buying your product.
Bore someone into submission.
It's absolutely right. And I think there is there's an ethical almost dimension to this. That you've got to contribute something to culture and be interesting and elevate it, as Bernbach said, not brutalise it.
Yeah. Well, there's another good Gossage quote about having some sort of responsibility for what you put out there.
That's right.
On the streets.
That's right.
In particular.
He also said, people read what interests them, and sometimes it's advertising. Yeah, exactly.
But these are all seem to make such good sense to you and I, but they would be considered radical to lots of people.
Well, they would, yeah.
Because we're talking about, it's essentially entertainment, and if you make it interesting rather than, pushing the product front on, all these things, I don't know.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into this, this asking it through this lens. So essentially, at the moment, if we're going to go through the sort of lens of the putting on a show, at the moment we've got low audiences and an empty auditorium. So do you think that's the case? Would you say that it's...
I'd say it's perhaps dwindling. A lot of people, so many people, ad blockers on, don't they? And you can look at there are various measures. There's my work which sort of shows how advertising's changed, but there are also other measures that look at trust and look at humour in advertising, and they seem to be on the downward. But you kind of, I would say it's partly to do with the way that we treat audiences. That they are there to be, as it were, to be shot at. To use go back to Gossage's,
picked off rather than
picked off.
Entertained.
And that we need to sort of. Be interesting. But don't be outrageous. Be plucky, as David Abbott would say, but don't be outrageous. In fact, Ogilvy agreed with that. Don't shock people. And it seems to me, to use the theatre metaphor. I talk about this in Look Out. In 1913, Stravinsky and Diaghilev put on The Rite of Spring in Paris, and it was highly rhythmic. It also negated the audience's values, and tradition, I suppose, and sought to destroy everything that had gone before. It was very innovative, and it was quite brutal. It was all about there was no narrative, I should say, no story. It was maidens of the earth, and one of them gives herself up for sacrifice and kills herself. And they were, instead of being ballet, and the whole point of ballet is, in my view, is that it's all about grace, and it's all about the repudiation of gravity. So it's as if the soul is moving, and is not like we're not like a thing or a mechanism, but we move with almost lifted up from gravity, elevated from it, and it sought to undermine all of that. And so people moved around the stage in a very clod-hoppy manner, stomping their feet. Anyway, this completely split the audience, and there was hissing and booing, and then there was cheering from the sort of more progressive side of the audience. And, people were swearing at each other. There were almost punch-ups, people. And it caused a massive hoo-ha. And, some of the advertising you see today, I think, sets out to provoke or to shock or to, just sort of unsettle. And it's quite confrontational. You come back to that stare again, an adversarial stance.
So could you think of an example that does that without wanting to call out anyone's particular work, but just
difficult not to, isn't it? But
it is,
there are examples of things which are quite shocking. I mean, not that shocking, but there's the Burger King mouldy Whopper type thing.
Is that ultimately being considered to be a success for Burger King or not?
I mean, Mark Ritson wrote something about Burger King's campaigns. I think I'm right in saying that recently.
He defended it, didn't he? I think.
Did he, or did he not? I'm not sure he did.
I think I was surprised that
I thought it was the other way around. But anyway, perhaps I don't want to attribute anything to him that I shouldn't. Yeah. I show in the book the an ad which has been fated by the industry, and it's for Libresse, and it's the Viva la Volva ad, which is sort of which has actually a lot of the features of the avant-garde in it, and even down to the sort of tunnels and the kind of inward feeling of that, and the self, looking at the self in the mirror, the kind of jaunty, but at the same time mocking, or feels a bit mocking. I mean, it's not, perhaps I don't know if it's meant to be or not, but it's sort of, there's something about it that I think feels a bit feels provocative, and and it was intended to be, I'm sure, and it's that sort of work that gets rewarded at Cannes and wherever else. But when you test it or you show it to the general public, they don't really like it.
Do they not?
No. So in our measurement system at System 1, we measure emotional response to advertising. And we've shown how this can, when you use it in conjunction with share of voice and extra share of voice, you can predict market share gains much better, when you know how what people feel. It's like a measure of quality, if you like. And it gets 1 star, And so you've got...
And that's because they find it alienating, or they don't feel involved.
They feel
interesting because...
upset, or neutral even to it.
Because if we go back to the 2,500 dots, and you got that little red dot, doing something very provocative and not like any of the others would seem to be a good way of bucking that system. So if you were presenting that, you would say, this isn't like the surrounding ad break, it's very provocative. But so where does that... Is it that it's not emotional?
Well, it's sort of designed. I suppose it's designed for. It's probably designed for impact rather than long-term memory, because it.
So people would remember it, but the memories would not.
One of the things I think I say in the book, the last book, is that positive emotional response lasts with us. Lasts, and memories associated with that lasts a lot longer than negative emotional response. I mean, if you look back at your life, you probably remember there are more things there are more good things you remember. That's why we get very nostalgic as we get older. But there's something to that positive emotional response is generally more helpful for lasting memories, and that the sort of work that provokes, I suppose, or that's a bit shocking. I go back to what David Ogilvy and David Abbott would say, just pushes people away a bit.
Right. It's a
And
short-term hit.
It is. It's going to be a short-term hit because it'll be picked up by PR, by press, and you'll get some earned media from it. But, is it the sort of thing that people enjoy watching? Not on the whole.
I often wonder when they, again, going back to those 100 best things on Channel 4, best ads on Channel 4, what the cumulative effect of things like the PG Tips monkeys, that kind of roll on that are still in people's minds.
Still there,
I don't know whether they sell, I'm sure they don't sell Smash Potato anymore, but I'm trying to think what else would have been in there that still sold, but it's still got some sort of residual feeling in most people.
Yeah, or Castlemaine Forex.
Castlemaine Forex,
Carling Black Label. I mean, there were so many, weren't there? That to anyone who was around at the time, they're still with us. You talk to a taxi driver, as I often do, about advertising, and they all remember them. And they say, yeah, it's true. Advertising has changed. You're right.
Well, also the interesting thing is then all of the ones that we remember then were also the big award winners of the day. Whereas I think what happens now is the big award winners tend to be. I mean, I don't know where the Mouldy Burger stuff ran. I don't think it was in England, but often the things that are winning awards seem a bit more niche, and almost they used to be hand in hand with the most famous thing of the year. That was the most liked thing of the year. That was the most remembered thing. It all seemed to kind of wrap up. I don't know if I'm sort of remembering that in too much rose-tinted ways, but that's it. All the ads we've mentioned were all big award winners, but they're all very famous and loved.
There was one with Geoffrey Palmer for Hellman's Mayonnaise with a rabbit. I can't imagine that winning an award today. But it was, charming and funny.
Yeah.
And you look actually, and I do this, and thanks to an agency I worked with, they analysed the Cannes winners over a period of years that had a sort of counted the number of humorous sort of strategies, if you like, versus purpose strategies, and they cross over. They cross over in about 2010, I think it was.
Oh, really? That early?
So they've been. One's been going down, humorous work, and that I suppose worthier work has been taking over.
In awards,
those that win awards, and we see it in our testing data as well. It happened a little bit later for the work that we test, for clients, is that people don't find advertising as funny as they did 10 years ago, and at the same time, there's a different kind of emotional response, which is kind of being pleased for others, which is not as effective as humour.
Is there? I'm trying to think of some good example, because obviously it's easy to bash purpose-driven stuff, and I often do. But I'm trying to think whether there are great examples of that doing really well for companies that get less talked about than.
Well, I mean, one of the problems is defining what purpose is.
Well, it feels like it's a strand. It's like it's one tool that may be great for one product. It's just when it gets used, when it's like we should use this across everything, is the issue.
That's right. Is it perhaps just reframing it as, does it have a purpose, or does the brand serve a purpose? What is the purpose it serves?
Yeah.
And Patrick Collister said that to me.
Obviously, also the other problem is that they all end up with the same kind of brief, really.
Well,
we're helping communities, we're helping people be people, or whatever it may be. So you end up doing ads that are not only category generic; they're just
they start to, and they can. The danger is they start to look like borrowed interest as well. That then they're not. That it's sometimes it can be difficult to make it work.
So, what are the fads today that you think will vanish? So again, I'm trying to shoot this through the stage thing. Are there sort of performances going on that you think that's just a sort of vanishing trend? Purpose. Will purpose come and go? or will that, or will it? I mean, I guess you could probably go back 40 years and we could find a bunch of ads that you go, well, I guess that's purpose. Obviously that's not a new thing.
No,
it's just how they tackle that brief, and perhaps it will recede back into one of a number of things rather than being so predominant. I don't know.
It's very difficult to predict the future, isn't it? You know, I mean, the world is changing. I mean, the world has changed in the last week. You know, in what's happening in Ukraine, and it's a who knows quite what's going to happen and how culture will change, but it might, and it's difficult to predict. What will. All I can do is sort of show what's been happening up to now. I feel I'd be a fool to try and predict the future, but you're right. There are some quite clear changes. I think the loss of narrative, the loss of dialogue, the loss of connection between people, the loss of spontaneous expression in the face, the loss of music, and what tends to have been replacing these things are other forms of rigidity, the freeze frame effect, the rhythm, rhythmic in both visual and audio sense.
And again, when you give talks on this, or you talk to marketing directors, presumably they must recognise that that's true, and then are they then galvanised to think, right, let's change that?
It depends. I think it perhaps depends on. I've had quite a few conversations with CMOs, who I would say are around the age of 50, shall we say, who probably will remember what advertising looked like, and they're struggling to explain it or they're struggling. Their teams don't necessarily, who've grown up in the digital world, don't really recognise or understand what they mean, and sometimes. They say that they brief their agencies, but their agencies that aren't coming back with the sort of work that they're kind of expecting. And so I've been invited into a few companies to sort of try and talk about this and to give a language to the audio visual world, because no one really kind of talks about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine even the way you're describing it there is a move forward from probably 10 years ago, where those same marketing directors would have felt inhibited about referencing old stuff because they're in a new world and it was all changing. Yes. So to reference back to that stuff, or even to brief in something that maybe we should use a character, it would be almost that so old world that they wouldn't feel comfortable saying that. Whereas there's a lot of debate about this stuff now.
But and evidence as well to show it works.
And evidence,
and as Paul Feldwick says, I hate to steal his best lines. He has many, but he says we see the more we seem to know what works, the less we seem to be doing it. That's absolutely.
So I guess one thing that occurs to me is, could any of this have been averted or avoided? Or was it just inevitable? This is just broad social cycles. So there's nothing we could have done. Lots of people will blame, in our business, the ad industry, the Martin Sorrells, whoever it may be, for not protecting the sort of values that advertising used to have. Do you think it could have been avoided, or it's just...
Not entirely, but maybe it could have been... I mean, in Lemon, I talk about some of the left brain tendencies in the running of agencies, and I think there's been a bit of a loss of experience as well in the younger, I suppose older employees. As they get expensive, they're let go.
I think also even the people running the agencies, I think 30 years ago, the spokesman for the industry would have been the creative people. Hegarty, Abbott, I don't know, I'm trying to think in the States, Ed McCabe, Dan Wyden, Bill Bernbach, all creative people. Whereas now, there, they would be all left-brain people. It'd be Martin Sorrell from finance. It would have been the guy at Publicis, who I've already forgotten his name since he's left. What was his name? The famous guy who left a couple of years ago. Who was from the computer department.
Right, yes.
Who else is left? Omnicom. That was the guy who used to be the FD. It's the three biggest networks, all either computer or finance people.
That's right.
Not communication people.
It's a different style of thinking, totally. I was saying this to my colleagues the other day, that, you go out for lunch. Where did that go? But you go out for lunch, with... I went out for lunch with Adrian Holmes and John O'Driscoll and Seamus O'Farrell the other day. Anyway, we had lunch, and there is a sort of agenda to what you're going to talk about, but you don't necessarily tackle it in a linear fashion. There are things that you just know that in conversation you'll sort of get round to it, and that you sort of there's sort of a way that it's sort of a bit of a dance, and you gradually. Whereas, that's very different from the very linear thinking, I think, that you get in a lot of businesses today, which, there are three things we're going to talk about. Here's the agenda, bam, bam, bam.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get to often you get to a much better solution by just letting things flow, ebb and flow and come naturally. And it's a totally different style of being and thinking, and it's much more, associated with the right brain than it is the linear way of thinking.
Very similar to the different types of ads you described. That I think the ones that you described from earlier times would be everybody knows the setup. This ad's coming on to try and sell you something. So it can try and entertain you or try and do something. We know the deal. Yeah.
We know the deal. Advertising was very self-aware.
Yeah, self-aware.
It's very now self-aware. It knew what it was. We're only an ad.
We're just an ad. We'll try and make you laugh, and maybe if you like our ads, you might try us.
It doesn't take itself too seriously. Yeah. Whereas advertising today is very self-conscious, which is very different. And self-conscious, it's the left hemisphere very self-conscious, the right hemisphere very self-aware.
But also deluded. So ads that turn up either trying to be your best friend, trying to say, we really, really care about, the people of Newcastle or whatever it may be. And you think, I bet they don't. It's like, I think most of those kind of things are rejected as you're turned up to sell me something, I bet.
Yeah.
Not really because you really care.
Yeah.
So it seems beyond self-aware, it seems deluded that I don't know who would buy into that sort of, that kind of message.
Well, it as I said, I think, it requires a different way of thinking, doesn't it? One that we've kind of lost the habit of. And a self-awareness, a sort of plucky humility and modesty as well that used to characterise advertising. It was sort of modest but plucky at the same time, and had a bit of swagger to it, But was self-aware. It was cool. I mean, that's what, cool is kind of right brain.
But presumably that kind of advertising to sell in needs a lot of grit, because it's much easier selling in.
Yes.
It's like when you do a pitch, if there's two routes and that one says, we know we're only cheese, we know we're not a big part of your life, blah, blah, blah. And the other says, it's the cheese that built an empire and it's easy to sell that in because you've got to go all the way through the company and they go, oh yeah, that makes me feel good about my job selling cheese. Whereas that sort of slightly self-deprecating, we know our place and so we're going to, is harder because it doesn't make people internally feel so great about their job. Whereas these things where they go, we give half a p to, you don't get half a p anymore, do you? We give 1p even to whatever it may be. So aren't we great? You think, aren't we great? And it's sort of, internally you think, let's say that about us because we sound great.
Yes.
But whether anybody will believe it is obviously a different thing.
You're right. And it's, you kind of, I'm just thinking I was looking at an ad the other day that David Abbott was talking about, which was, it takes guts to charge this much for a razor.
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing which you can't imagine seeing today, because
too
it's
human.
It's too human, isn't it?
Yeah.
And instead, you boast about being the cheapest or something. Today. I mean, it's so there's a different way of being and thinking that and relating to your audience.
I mean, I can remember, it just brings to mind one example of doing that and being laughed out of the room in a pitch. That there was a pitch for two energy companies merging into one, and all of the ads that we did at CDD were all essentially off the back of, we know what could be a more boring thing that you're ever going to see today, an ad announcing that two energy companies are going to merge. And they were all jokes around that. And they sort of were appalled, they kind of laughed their heads off and then ushered us out the room. It's just, why would you say that this is a boring thing? This is really exciting for us. We're, energy company A is merging with energy company B.
Well, to us, it's absolutely
news.
Great.
And they were,
but to the people out there, it makes it interesting.
They don't care. Exactly, they don't care about
That's
that.
That's right.
So, I mean, it's another example. If we'd have said, this is the biggest news, if our pitch would have been, this is the biggest news you're going to read all year, energy company A is merging with it, they'd probably have bought it. We may have won the pitch. May still be operating that company today.
Yeah, that's right.
So, another question, if we're talking about the audiences at this theatre, do they change much from decade to decade, or Gen X to Gen Y, and therefore has advertising to reconstitute itself every decade, or are human beings pretty stable?
Well, it's a bit of both, isn't it? I think culture changes, the context changes, cultural imprinting changes, so people live different lives, different experiences. But actually some of these very basic principles about, the face, the hands, the living, people connecting with each other, betweenness, two people. When you get two unique individuals connecting with each other, something else is created, this kind of sense of betweenness. Dialogue, movement, characters, spontaneous expression in the face and the hands, the gestures. All of this stuff it continues and will always, interest the right hemisphere of the brain. Will be of interest to all of us.
So you say predominantly it's kind of stable, but there's smaller things coming in.
Well, the culture changes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then also our tools and the way that we interact with the world changes. So when you get a new thing like a mobile phone emerging, it changes our behaviour and it changes our habits of thinking. So they become very narrow, and so and you see this when you get these big technological leaps, it can change our habits of thinking for a time. And push us towards a left brain way of interpreting the world. Technology, much like chemistry or physics, in earlier decades and centuries, when it captures the public's imagination, that's the lens through which it looks at everything. This is the answer to everything. How can we do this with technology? And so you lose some of the other ways of thinking that you had before, and everything becomes quite transactional, engineering kind of mentality.
But do you think, for example, if you're doing an ad for, iPhone, what are we up to, 13 now, a lot of it would be similar to doing an ad for a portable radio in 1955, which is, a lot of it is to do with whether you're seen as being cool, informed, all of those sort of things.
Yes.
Although, obviously, the difference between the two things are night and day. The things you're tapping into are for the humans to try and get them to notice, and would be some of those issues that are ongoing.
Yes, that's right. And, but we don't, because of, I think, the way that we're relating to the world and the attention we pay to it changed, we don't do it in the same way. I mean, look at the Yellow Pages ads, of the 80s, perhaps early 90s. They were B2B ads.
Yeah.
They were, it was the Google of its day, I suppose, the Yellow Pages. But I'm not sure that you see anything quite like that.
That is exactly Google, really, isn't it?
You wouldn't just the way they were filmed,
Yeah.
the dialogue, the way that they're directed. Not really kind of what we see today, is it? I mean, there are still obviously ads that are similar, but there was something about them that was charming.
Well, it felt like they were doing a dual job. There's the information side, which is essentially saying, we're packed with information,
not just for the boring things in life,
and
the block trains.
Not just for the things that you would imagine it's for. But it was also it also made you warm to them, didn't it?
Yes.
As a personality. Whereas I would imagine if I had to guess at what Google may be doing with a similar thing, it would be lots of flashing images at you. It's got this. The equivalent of it's got blockchain things, this thing, that thing.
Yes.
Rather than making you feel warmer towards Google.
Yes.
As well as telling you what it did. I mean, I suppose it's a broader point. It's not just there for the boring things. Rather than now, they would probably try and tell you everything it did.
Well, there has been a similar Google ad where they just, they have the sort of box in the middle and it's someone typing in, whatever it is, holidays, or and then you see images of people on holiday, and then it's whatever else, show me this, show me that, and so trying to do all of those things in one ad. Whereas the Yellow Pages ad campaign, it was
it trusted
one
you
thing
to
at a
relate
time.
that information to other things.
The bicycle or the train, for the father that's bored. And David Abbott talked about, he called it sentiment. That the importance of
which used to be a
sentiment.
dirty word at the time.
Yeah,
sentimental ads were sort of considered to be a bit un-British.
Well, he got an American director in, didn't he? For those.
Did he? Was that American? Was that Bob Brooks?
I think it was. Yeah, it was Bob Brooks. Yeah.
It was considered much more an American thing at the time. So, what would you say? What styles play well with audiences? So, if we're trying to, if we're putting on a play, and we want to bring in audiences, what would the styles be that you would, would you put on? Presumably a comedy or a thriller or a drama or something sentimental?
I'd say probably a comedy.
So would that be your number one? If you've got to sell out this house in this fictional theatre that we've tied ourselves to in this...
I think that... I mean, it's a bit difficult to make direct comparisons, isn't it? But yeah, I think comedy, drama... I mean, one of the things that I do in... Look Out is I look at what humour is. I try and explain what it is. I mean, not many philosophers have actually looked at it, and
what would you say it was? Did you come up with an answer?
Well, I look at the work of probably the only philosopher to have taken it seriously, Henri Bergson,
right.
And he says that it's really it pokes fun at rigidity. And it keeps society flexible. It's very important socially because it keeps us all kind of, loose as opposed to brittle and rigid. And he says, there are different. It's a bit like, sort of. There's something mechanical about the way that it pokes fun at mechanicity. So, you can, he talks about humour as being different types of humour, the humour of repetition. Think the fast show, just simply repeating things enough and people start to laugh, because it starts to feel mechanical. Also, humour of, he talks about exaggeration, so that, you have a nascent... just a kernel of an idea which you blow up out of all proportion, Then he talks about what I call overlapping beams, which are seeing the same thing from two different perspectives. And we absolutely delight in oscillating between two perspectives, so I could see this as, you can imagine a stage show, Molière was great.
So what would that be? You see a hole in the ground and you see someone walking, you see a hole in the ground, someone walking.
Yeah, I mean, it could be.
They're going to meet.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of, I mean, exactly. Or the sort of delight in knowing that that person on the stage thinks that that's happening, whereas that person on the stage thinks that that's happening, and you can hold both of those in your mind at once, but not totally at once, and you have to oscillate a bit between them. That we find very funny. So he also talks about inversion. So turning something that would be a great example. The Heineken water in Mallorca ad, it's inverting it. And he talks about transposition to a different key, like in music. So you might have so Carlsberg, don't do nightclubs, but if they did, they'd be the best in the world. So you're taking an idea about greatness and you're transposing it to something else. So all of these different types of humour, they not only get a laugh in your spot and help to connect you with the audience, but they're ways actually of structuring a long-term campaign. Repetition, exaggeration, inversion, the transposition of key, this overlapping beams. You can think of many examples of all of these things. And that's I think the loss of humour not only means that we're losing the ability to connect. Jeremy Bullmore once said to me at lunch, the thing about humour is that someone laughs, you've made a connection with them. We're not only losing our ability to connect, but we're losing our ability to structure use humour to structure a long campaign. Reassuringly expensive, Stella Artois.
Long-term campaigns seem to have become unpopular too. Obviously, there was a time when most brands would have an ongoing theme or campaign.
Yeah.
And that seems to have died out. I don't know whether that's because marketing directors are coming and going more quickly and that's a function of that, or whether people are getting bored of them, or agencies are not doing them.
They wear out in the boardroom more quickly than they do amongst the general public. There's
But again, of the list of things that we know that works, that's another one, an ongoing campaign for a number of years to bed in, for people to get used to know who it's from and what the message is.
Specsavers, I mean, these absolutely refreshing those, mental neural networks. But and comedy was a great way of doing that. Humor was a great way of doing that. I mean, I think it's a problem.
I've got to keep dragging us back to this theatre analogy.
Please do.
Do audiences respond better to performances put on by their peers, or is age irrelevant? So we discussed earlier that advertising, it seems stranger as I get older that it's quite young. Whereas design, which is quite a similar thing, isn't. So most of the best people in design work till they drop. Whereas in advertising, I don't know what the age is, but they fall off a cliff at 45, which is odd because obviously the older you get, the more experience you get at being different ages and dealing with different people, which seems like that would be helpful if you then got to talk to different types of people.
Life experience.
Life experience is probably a better way of putting it. So if you're putting on a play, why would you not use someone who's experienced all different ages rather than just a couple of different ages?
Well, a good question. I mean, I think it's important, important to have experienced people around, who've experienced different things in their life and different periods as well, and different kind of understand what might have been done before, whether it's right or not now, and also passing things on to the younger generation, I think is hugely important. But I think when you look at advertising today, and it does seem to have an awful lot. I mean, the actual ads does seem to have an awful lot of young people in it. They don't see much for people, older than about 35.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a worry because, it causes people to detach if people don't
see themselves in that
No,
world.
that's right. I mean, you're advertising, you don't have to show that target audience for an ad for that target audience, but it does But it does seem to me that you're not going to connect if you don't have a bit of breadth.
Yeah. Or reality. But in terms of sort of pure communication, if you're trying to get a message over to someone and you've written a play, it would seem absurd to say, you know, we're looking to bring in a group of 30-year-olds, so we have to have a play by someone who's under 30.
Yes.
It would seem, it just seemed ridiculous, wouldn't it? Whereas essentially that's kind of advertising it in a similar space.
Yes.
Which is we need someone of that age group to write for them. Whereas obviously, I can't remember who did the research, but in most other fields, the sort of Nobel Prizes or all the big prizes are won by old people.
By people, you know, in their 50s and 60s.
Because being able to run fast and pick up heavy objects doesn't really come into it then. Whereas being able to think learning stuff and thinking is really handy as you get older.
Yes.
But so I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. But it's kind of weird, really. I'm trying to think whether it's worse or better than it was.
Well, I was going to say, was it ever thus? You know,
I think in a weird way. I do a lot of interviews with people who were around in the 70s, particularly, and in a weird way, it was sort of in some ways it was younger. We did a podcast with Tim Delaney recently, and he was saying when he was 21, he was like running. He was working on Harrods and running different accounts. 21, there's barely any. So there's barely any students of 21 in the business. They seem to take longer to get in, but then they go quicker as well. Obviously, Tim is still in it now, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's always been pretty young. It's difficult to compare, but I think it certainly used to be that there would be more trust given to younger people, which doesn't seem to be there. And I think there used to be more older people around. So it seems like it's got condensed either side. You know, sometimes you see students now, they're like 28, 30.
Yes.
I don't know if I answered that question rather than you. We're allowed to do that. We can move on. Is it important, we're putting on this show again, I'll keep reminding you every time, that the audiences remember the show and carry that with them? And does that dictate the kind of show you put on? So, you know, before we were all on our phones and computers, remembering ads used to be a part of the brief to try and get someone to remember it. So you would have characters, jingles, all of these rhyming end lines, all of those things, because they were useful for people to remember.
Yeah.
There was a period when everything started to go digital where lots of people say you don't need that anymore because it's instant. You can go direct to the person. You don't need to think, well, will they remember that in 2 years' time?
It's more important than ever.
You think
it's
so?
One of the points that I make in the latest book. With more brands, companies moving online, they lose their physical availability, which means that they lose their mental availability too, which means that you've got to spend more on the kind of advertising that's memorable, that establishes that brand, so that you're top of mind when you go to type into Google. You know, you don't type in vacuum cleaners, you type in Dyson.
Yeah.
So you know it's absolutely essential, and you just look at the work of Peter Field and Les Binet, and they show that if you're an online business, if you're a subscription business, if you're in a business where there's high category growth, or a business or a category where there's lots of research done, you're buying a new car or something, you've got to spend more on brand building advertising, not less.
So again, it's weird because every time we come up with one of these things, you think, well, people aren't doing that. You think that's how it should be, and that's a good idea. And then you go, well, actually, that isn't around much either. So GGT, for example, used to be great at those kind of memorable headlines, end lines, like you can't Kanak a Knaps, which is a really old one, or that will be the day.
Yes.
Wasn't GGT, but it was two guys who came from
Tosh
GGT.
got to Toshiba.
Hello, Tosh got to Toshiba. There was endless end lines that were impossible to forget. And you think, well, that would help. I think they sound uncool now. It sounds like a bit uncool. Hello, Tosh, got a Toshiba sounds uncool. But it would really help Toshiba because you could remember it more.
Well, something that can be that sort of just slips into the vernacular.
Yeah,
is very important.
So again, it sounds like a real whinge. But what? So can you think of any of those that are around now? Obviously, the
meerkat
the
symbols.
meerkat is
It's used in the House of Parliament,
which has been brilliant.
Does what it says on the tin. That's pretty old now.
That's
but
20 odd years old.
Exactly.
But, I'm just trying to think of ones that are around now because again, if with the internet
should have gone Specsavers.
Should have gone Specsavers.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a good one. But what you're saying is, with the sort of clutter now around, to cut through and be remembered, and I think to keep quoting Paul Feldway, his other really good quote is the brain is the first search tool that people go to.
Yes.
So to be able to recall the brand rather than the category is useful. So why would you not have those kind of rhymes?
Absolutely, and the same for jingles.
They don't always sound cool. Or
finger of fudge.
Sound cool. Finger of fudge, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's charming and it's all part of the physicality, of the performance. It's part of the, it's part of, go back to the show analogy. It's, what's too silly to be said can be sung. What is, if you have anything to say, sing it. Lots of important people have said these things. But there's something about the performance of a thing and the way it's said, the intonation, the prosody, the sort of expression that is a hook, that stays with you. The rhythm of the way something is said, all of the assonance, the alliteration, all of that stuff is important, and you kind of that's what sticks in the memory, and that's getting the right, getting it absolutely right is a real skill.
And they also they can, as you say, you can say things sort of under the radar if they come in at oblique angles rather than front on. You may be able to say certain things half jokingly that stick, that if you said seriously would just be laughed out.
Yes, exactly.
I'm trying to think of an example now, but
well, that'll be the Dayu, it's probably
a
good one. And no, I just think opal fruit's made to make your mouth water. Is one that I still remember. That you just sort of.
Well, I think that's the other thing is. I think people, as you say, they want that sort of flat-on, direct, one-to-one, buy this because. And obviously, there is a sort of, people's defences are down when you come at it humorously or other ways that they'll accept the information in a way that they don't reject it.
There's no resistance.
There's no resistance, whereas front-on...
you charm your way in,
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, why does the peddler sing, as Paul Feldway says? Because, you charm your way into people's memories and hearts.
So, here's another one, back to our performance and audience. What's more important, the story or the performance? Can you separate them?
You need both, obviously, but I think actually performance is the thing that's underrated, is probably more important than anything else. Everyone talks about storytelling. No one really talks about the performance side of things. You look at ads with Rowan Atkinson for Barclaycard, the way that he delivers his lines. Barclaycard.
Yeah.
This is no time to go shopping.
Yeah.
That
Absolutely,
performance, it's so.
It's not really the story, is it?
It's so. And then what he does with his lips, the sort of, blah, 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 and then. All of that is the right brain is really alert to. And it's very memorable. the sort of way that you deliver a line, really important, and sticks in the memory. So that, I talk in the book about how to use a celebrity, and I think the way you do it is you get them to do their turn, the turn that they are famous for, and they can help bring something of themselves to it as well, to turn it into something.
Well, that's a really good example of the Barclaycard, because, as Paul says in his book, that was his character that they adopted, and he helped write the scripts. He did what suited him. Yeah. And I think, again, you have to be quite confident to... Well, I don't know whether it's confident, but all of these things seem so obvious, because you think, well, if that's what gets you the best results, go with that. But I think that people like to feel in control, and they like to feel like they're running the show. They're not just buying into Rowan Atkinson. They're telling him what to do, and they're guiding it, because without them, it would be nowhere. Whereas I think that's what I loved about the Peddler book, is that Paul was like, well, he was kind of very honest about that, how it came about, what worked, why it worked. And a lot of it was not all planned out. It wasn't all to do with all the super smart people at B&P, which there are.
No, there's a lot of, serendipity in great... the Dulux dog, wandered onto set. Leonard Rossiter and the Cinzano.
Yeah, that was his joke.
It was his. It was, why don't you do the old music hall trick? Yeah.
But I think there's less room for serendipity now. So
everything's tied down, isn't it?
Everything's tied down. People don't want. Forget the music hall joke. We've
already got it scripted.
We've already got this approved by everyone.
I know. It's like a legal contract, isn't it? As Dave Trott said. You've got to leave some leeway, and agencies I think do, but you've got to leave something for the shoot, and the brilliant in the Smash Martians ad where the last Martian falls over laughing at the end. Yeah, that was an accident. That wasn't it really? The Smash Martian falling over makes it really funny because he's laughing so hard he's fallen over. Is what we think. When it was just an accident,
But well spotted and kept.
Yeah, the leaf that fell down from the set in the Hofmeister bed. It's a leaf. I think that wasn't deliberate. I think it wasn't deliberate. So it's these things really help sometimes.
So, if audiences like a performance, the characters, the story, etc., wouldn't they be more likely to remember that troupe and therefore come out and watch the same lot again?
Yeah, quite so.
So, essentially, it's another way of saying, shouldn't we have long-running campaigns that people recognise? Why would you not do that, or why aren't we doing that?
Well, there's an expression. You need long-running campaigns, reach, and lasting effects go with reach. Short-term effects go with targeting, with narrow. Targeting. But, you get the sort of mentality which is, why would we want to spray and pray? I heard that expression.
Spray and pray.
The hope that something's going to happen.
Yeah.
But, that's the wrong way of thinking, isn't it? Yeah. So you do need long-running campaigns with an idea that is easily refreshed or that keeps giving, that allows you to create something that's new every time, but that has at its heart, something interesting. In fact, I talk about this. I talk about really, it's kind of like a parable, isn't it? A long-running campaign. A parable where you say, and so the moral of the story is ...
Yeah.
That's really what I think we're talking about when we're talking about a long-running, big idea type campaign. It's that. And the thing about parables is they're not direct. They don't tell you what to think. The audience takes out of them what's happening, and they present something, an event that happens, and you draw out of it yourself. Yeah. So, the Yorkshire tea ads, at the moment, where Yorkshire where we do things proper, what's the moral of this parable? That keeps being told in different ways. Well, it's that if you want a proper cup of tea, buy Yorkshire tea. There is, I think if you think about your campaign as a parable and the, what's the moral of the story, as it were, and I don't be moralistic, I sort of say, what's the moral of the story? You get what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's quite a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah. And that translates into this kind of, I think at BNP there used to be, how would it be played back to us? So it may be that those Volkswagens are very reliable. Try and think of it in basic terms that may be played back rather than what we want to say.
Yes.
In basic language, what might come back.
Yeah, that's right.
I think also the benefits of the long, depending on what it is, but with probably things like the Meerkat, although it's, God, what is that now, 20 years old? I don't know. It's
about 14, I think.
Or let's say the Carling Black Label or some of those. When they turn up, you think, I quite like these. They're going to entertain me. So you sit through it, and then you can't help but obviously take in their message along the way that they want to be reminded.
And you probably half know what's coming, but the delight is waiting for it to happen and watching it unfold.
But they've slipped in that just a reminder of what they do or why they're good. Or
well, that's what I think the Barclaycard campaign with Road Accident was brilliant at, because it not only did it was it an interesting show each time, but it slipped in a different feature of the card, insurance or travel insurance or anything else. Each one was a little show, a little play.
So you couldn't help. The equivalent of the public would be, it does lots of other stuff you probably wouldn't think of. You might not be able to grab each thing, but you think, there's a ton of other stuff. If you look into it, there'll be a lot of other stuff. Each ad focused on one thing, That's
it wasn't like trying to tell you 3 or 4 things in one ad.
Yeah.
It was
insurance
like,
or whatever it may have been.
Just one thing at a time. Adrian Holmes says, if you throw 10 tennis balls at someone, they're going to drop them all. If you throw them one, they might catch it.
Yeah. I suppose it's funny, most of those, I don't know if you call it a paper that's put out by the IPA, don't feel like they really trumpet creativity. Whereas you do, you're very pro that. That's the main thing I obviously took out. That seems to have been devalued over time. Creativity. I don't know how you describe creativity, but that's, I would say, solving problems in surprising ways.
Yeah.
I guess. And surprising ways seems to be a scary way of, to a lot of people. The fact that you might do something surprising seems a bit scary.
Well, that's right. The left brain likes to control, and it likes to be in control, and can't really bear risk. And some of the, all great ads, there is a kind of element of risk, in a sense when you go with it. When I went with the front cover of Lemon, working with Adrian Holmes, at first I thought, oh my goodness, Lemon. It was a great when it came about, the way it happened over lunch, and he said, because I was listing all the sorts of poor attempts at a name that I'd had. What do you think, Adrian?
What were the runners-up?
Oh, goodness me, I couldn't even... I don't think I could remember... If I could remember them, I don't think I'd be too embarrassed to share them. I can't actually remember them now. That shows, doesn't it? And he said, we were both shaking our heads, and then he said, the brain. It's a bit like a lemon, isn't it? And then he said, lemon. How the advertising brain turns sour, And imagine the lemon, because obviously
the Volkswagen.
And at first I thought, wow, that's a bit. What's that? That's quite out there, isn't it? Wow, that's brave, kind of brave. And unlike anything else, that I've seen,
or that they'd
and an ad on the front cover, and you've got to let it sit with you, haven't you, for a while? If you feel uncomfortable, but also a sense of possibility, but you can also sense the possibility with it at the same time. You probably onto something, aren't you? So, you know, that feeling that goes, a slight feeling of discomfort, you know, and then gradually you realise it could be nothing else. It has to be that.
It has to be that. Well, I think also it made that feel very more mass and welcoming to put that on the front.
Yeah. And its focus was creative, and of course, that was the whole point.
Yeah. So, semi-controversially, you say the key to creativity is talent. So, do you mean innate talent? Because obviously, people don't like. I found that people don't like to think that some people are talented and some people aren't, because it's
odd, isn't it?
It's too alienating and exclusive to assume that some people have a talent. In my experience, obviously, some people are brilliant at creating stuff, and the way they adopt certain voices, or can condense ideas into the simplest things, or can create things that are intriguing or funny. But it feels like as a business, we don't like to think of it that way, because somehow that gives some people more kudos or clout than others, and it should all be a bit more democratic, and we should all sit open plan, and we should all
come from anywhere.
Do it between us, because you know, a lot of the meetings now are much more collaborative, is the sort of key word that everybody uses now. But in my experience, that's not really how things work. Generally,
I don't think so either.
And often the sort of the people that I've found who are, would say were really good, can be difficult, opinionated, all of these things that are uncomfortable. Do you agree with that? Yes. Okay. Next question.
I agree. Well, I agree. Look, you know, I think that some people are better at some things than others. You know, I think we have to accept that.
But why do we fight that? I mean, I think we fight that in advertising, particularly over the last 10 years. It's become much more democratic. And that sounds like a good thing. And it's become more collaborative, and that sounds like a good thing. Often people say, we need, you've got to be very collaborative. And
the notion that everyone is of equal worth should not be confused with, you know, that everyone has their own unique and individual talents and experiences that they bring to bear on something.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there are certain people who are better at telling jokes than other people.
Yeah.
There are some people who are better at skiing. I'd be a hopeless skier.
But why do we fight that then? I'm trying to think whether that's just advertising. Presumably it can't just be advertising.
I think it's the world.
It must be everything, yeah.
And, you know, I think you have to appreciate that, and you're right, I think that creative people can be quite difficult and stubborn sometimes, but passionate, you know, and you need that element of passion and drive and ability to pull things together to create something new, and that's we should appreciate that more, I think.
And instinct. What about instinct? Where does that fit in?
Instinct is very important.
Because again, that's obviously the problem with instinct is that it's not always very scientific or quantifiable, and you go, well, why should I trust John Webster? You know, obviously there's a reason it's got all that. That's perhaps not a good example, but people don't like to trust instinct or someone's feeling. But obviously you could go, well, I would trust John Webster or John Negerty. Even if I disagreed, I would give it weight.
Yeah. No, instinct and intuition. Intuition is very important and comes about through experience, and you know, is associative, you know, and it's which is the right brain is.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, Einstein, I think, said something similar, that, you know, instinct or intuition is extremely important in anything.
Yeah.
And we can only really think of something new by thinking about things that have been the same, you know, that have sort of been similar in the past. You know, a metaphor is a vehicle for thinking, you know, and that is important. You know, and a lot of my research actually has come about through instinct. You know, so it was an observation. I mean, I was observing, where have all the characters gone in advertising? Is it is this, can we check this? Is it just my, is it just me, or have they really gone? And we did the analysis, and they had, that led me on to thinking about Ian McGilchrist's work, the scientist, on which I based Lemon and Lookout, and there was, good grief, the kind of things he's describing as, the left hemisphere as being like, it sort of explains our world today and what's happened in advertising. You can see the visual features of it. And so, I tested it out, I tried it, looked at it. There seems to be something in this, you have to follow an instinct to create something new, that it doesn't come about through calculation. And most scientists, will write a paper and make it sound like it's a discovery is the result of a logical sort of progression, a linear and logical set of hoops that have been jumped through. And actually, that much of the time, the great discoveries in science have come about through accident.
Yeah.
And
notions.
Or
people,
notions, yes.
Like Tesla, thinking, wouldn't it be great if you could do X and Y without having any clue of how to get there, and then following it? Whereas it seems like in advertising, there's loads of brilliant creative people I've come across who work instinctively, and sometimes if you ask them to explain it or sell it or rationalise it, they can't. They just go, well, it's just good, isn't it? It's just better than the other thing. So consequently, they're at a disadvantage because they're in a right brain.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things.
So they can't
articulate it. And that's one of the things that I like to think I've tried to do.
Yeah,
is to give language to try and articulate all the things that we instinctively felt and knew. The right brain doesn't have a voice because language is basically in the left hemisphere. Is to give a voice to the right hemisphere. Is to explain why, the living, why humour, why. All the things we've been talking about work, to show they work, and to explain why they work. So, I'm hoping that, I'm the creative's friend. I'm hoping I'm also the client's friend.
I'm trying to think how you could condense some of those things down to useful tools for creatives to flash up, like cards.
Yeah.
Because I think it is like, for lots of creatives, it's like, they're in I think Peter Suter, who I used to work for, Abermaid, said his job as, what would he be called now, CCO, was to translate poetry into maths, was the process of trying to take the creative's work and sell it to the clients. So for most creatives, they're in a left brain world and can't quite...
Right brain, yes. Right brain,
sorry.
Yeah.
Look, I'm thinking about where you're pointing and then relating to me. And can't always operate in that world. They've got their instincts and their intuition and various other things. But to navigate that, they need other tools, which some haven't got.
Yes. Well, that's why in the books I kind of set out the sorts of things that work, and I don't, as we said, I don't want it to be seen as painting by numbers at all. I just want people to kind of absorb the sorts of things that work and use that,
But you see, I'm thinking the opposite. I'm thinking, why can't it be?
Perhaps it can be painting by
numbers. Checklist of 10 things.
One creative director said to me, I think what you've done is you've kind of provided a compass for us. You've kind of we've kind of lost our way a little bit, and you've kind of helped us to reorientate.
I think it'd be a good thing to reduce it to a 10 checkpoint thing. I think it would be useful. I mean, there are some agencies. I worked at an agency once where I was about to do a pitch, and a bit like the blogs I do, it would be I'd go through all the sort of logical decision-making things right through to the, type and colours and this thing and that thing. And the owner said, "Oh, don't do all that. It's just... makes it sound boring. Can't you just say, we thought of this and we think it'd be really cool?"
Yeah.
And because he wanted it to feel like it was magic. But for me, I can't really do why don't you do this work? It'd be really cool. You think, well, why would they believe that? Why don't I give them some evidence?
Yes.
Of what I thought of. They might disagree, but
I think you present the work with all the sizzle you can, and then say, well, why have you done it that way? Well, we know why you've done it that way because of this. I mean, the thing that with audio visual advertising, the thing I say is, I think, fairly easy checklist is when you see it or when you see this script, ask yourself, can you describe this by answering these 3 questions? Who's involved? What happens? Where is it set?
Yeah. They sound very...
If you can't answer, if you can answer, you're onto something, probably. If you can't, then you probably haven't got something memorable.
That's amazing. I think it'd be useful. I think most people are looking for help rather than wanting to float around.
It depends.
Most people are insecure.
Yeah.
It's not that they... so having some, what would you call them? Some guide ropes or things to hold on to and check
creative
would
palette.
be useful. Yeah. And you believe in local, not global.
I do, because, when you make local advertising, you can use the local cultural references. You can show the place. You can show the cities. You can... use accents, you can use, things that people in that country know about.
Yeah.
And all of those things give you the ability to connect with people. Trying to make an ad that works everywhere can often mean that you end up with an ad that works nowhere particularly well.
Yeah.
And you think of what the digital world has done. It's enabled us to make a style of advertising that could run anywhere, quite easily.
All stock footage,
but
generic messages, generic everything.
Exactly. I think a lot of car advertising looks a bit like that, but none of it really is kind of rooted in local culture. Yeah. And it's not to say it's impossible to make an effective global ad. Snickers, I think, have done it. Yeah. They've done it with Mr. Bean as well. They set out to work out, which celebrity or character would be known everywhere. But
they localise it a bit, don't they? Changing the characters
of course,
according to market.
Yeah.
So for the gains they may get
efficiency savings.
You think they lose in terms of connection?
I think you lose an awful lot. In connection terms, and memorability terms.
I'd love to see you go through all these points with a marketing director, because it goes against the whole trend of where everything's going.
Yeah. Well, when you
next time you do,
zag,
give us a call. I'll sit behind the mirror in a separate room.
Sit behind the wall.
God, I can't even remember what this means now. So the last one, it's got lastly. So where is the stage today?
Ah, yes.
Do you know what that means?
Yeah.
Where is the stage today?
Well, where is the stage? I look out with a question, really, which is, with increasing amounts of budget being spent on digital advertising, by which I mean the platforms of today, social media advertising, and increasingly television companies, broadcasters, trying to create addressable TV, and it's highly targeted. I asked the question, where is the stage for our brand building show? Because it seems to be disappearing. And I think it's a question we all need to think about a little bit. Where is the broad reach? Yeah.
Outdoor,
sit back and enjoy.
Yeah.
Where is the
film? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think actually television companies could also learn a lot from the work I've been doing when it comes to the type of programming that people enjoy. Because, there is a trend away from romance and comedy, betweenness, connection, all of those things, towards the horror and the thriller. And this is the context within which advertising is being made today. The escape to fantasy. Totally, that's what our times are like. These are what the times we live in.
Yeah.
And, people, I think, are yearning for some of that security and that connection again.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. Thrillers and, what do they call them, spandex movies seem to be the predominant thing, which are obviously not about relationships. The thought of someone making a film like Kramer versus Kramer, or I'm trying to think of some of those old films that there was no car crashes, guns or anything. It's about human relationships.
Look at what's happened to the romantic comedy. Fell off a cliff from 2000 onwards.
And obviously these things are driven mainly by what's going to make money. So someone must have thought people aren't interested in that anymore.
Well, they may have thought that, but I think you look at the most popular things on Netflix or whatever else. Friends was still pretty much still very popular today, isn't it? There's a what happens is in these if people are left brain dominant, and if they in these periods I think we are a bit left brain dominant, is the left brain tries to find ways to shock itself into feeling something. And so you get the rise of the horror and the thriller. And so you get, you look at this escape to fantasy as well. So you look at the, about 1910, 1920, you get this sort of escape to surrealism and strangeness, as well as, some quite shocking images, I suppose, with Picasso and the like. So, you get this, the theatre of the absurd, and all sorts of strange and shocking things. And that's, I think, what we're seeing with things like, Squid Game and other horrors and thrillers. I showed.
So what? Because people are feeling numb, they try and like self-harm. Or...
Yeah, it is that, and in a way, and that's that is, in a sense, I think where we sort of end up, and that's the context in which advertising's made. So, I suppose in this world of that's increasingly anxious and fearful, and also this sort of sense, I think, of detachment that you get in these periods. I sort of say, we need advertising with wit and charm, advertising that entertains, advertising with human vitality, and in the kind of world we're living in today, what could be more wonderful than that?
Well, that's a positive way to go out. It's a perfect ending. I was just going to ask you one last thing, which is if you were handed the reins of a big brand, marketing director, what things would you do? Would you set out to your team to ensure that they're obeyed by?
Well, I would want to ensure that they created a campaign that could last, that had all the things I've described, character, incident, place, that hopefully had some element of humour in it, that also used music and colour, which are also metaphors for meta-communication that help you to do things that, literally saying them can't do. And something that, recurs, that builds, that's cumulative, that, of course, therefore captures attention, that elicits an emotional response, to create a kind of parable with a the moral of the story is use our brand, and that's
excellent.
I think how I do it.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming. Anybody who's creating work would benefit from reading Orlando's 2 books, to understand how people are thinking and receiving information. And thanks for coming.
Well, thanks so much, Dave. No, I've enjoyed it hugely, and huge fan of what you do, and have drawn on your many podcasts and interviews in my work.
Brilliant. That was excellent.